Hi guys, this is Oliver Codd, and in this video I'm going to take you through the technical details of Nashville Scoring Strings. When you first download the library, you'll see a folder structure that looks like this. You'll also see a samples non-denoise folder, which are essentially the exact same samples but without the noise reduction being applied. Something we learned early on was that a lot of composers actually prefer to use samples without the noise reduction because it gives a certain realism and sense of liveliness to the performances. Other composers prefer to have a more clean, perfect recording, and so we included those as well. For those of you who don't see a need for the non-denoise samples, you can just throw that folder in the trash and save yourself some hard drive space. But if you do want to use them, all you have to do is go into the folder and replace the other samples folder with this one. Let's dive into Contact and see how the library is organized and structured. When you open up the Instruments folder, you'll see that we organized everything by section. Within each section, you'll have all of the articulations split out, as well as a second version of each articulation, which will be labeled B. The B patches are essentially a second pass of the same articulation. We included this second layer so that you can simulate a symphonic size string section. Nashville Scoring Strings was recorded in a half size, which is a little bit larger than a chamber size section and smaller than a symphonic, so we thought it'd be cool if you can simulate the larger size by combining the patches. Let's check out what that is actually like in context. So here's just the first layer. And here's the second layer. Now what I think is really cool is actually using a different mic position on the second layer. So maybe the first one's just got the Decatree, but the second we're going to use the wides instead. Or maybe we want to use the close. Back to the subject of noise reduction, even though we did apply it to the main set of samples, we didn't go too crazy with it because we didn't want to take away any of the liveliness that we spent so much hard work capturing at the sessions. You'll notice there's still some room noise and the occasional scraping of chairs, which I personally love, but for those of you who want to clean up the recordings even more than we have provided by default, I would suggest you take a look at the modulation page. On the modulation page, you'll see three separate AHDSR mods. The first one is routed to a high-pass filter, the second is routed to a low-pass filter, and the third is your traditional AHDSR, which is routed to volume. Having the ability to shape the decays of the high end and the low end independently give us a lot of flexibility as far as how we can tame both room noise and low-end decay that can sometimes muddy up a mix. Now, rather than having you guys start from scratch, we included a reduce noise button, which will give you a starting setting to work with, which gets you pretty close. But depending on how fast the performance is and maybe the instrument type, you'll want to tweak these settings. Let's first listen with it off. Now on. So a lot cleaner. We also included a note interruption button, which will cut the decays of one note when a second note is triggered. Most of the patches have a sample offset of negative 140 milliseconds. This is part of the design as we recorded real repetitions for all of the short notes, which require that little bit of detail in between the transients. By default, it'll be at 140, but if you need to play it in and you find the latency to be overbearing, you can dial this up to your desired taste. Just make sure that you dial it back and compensate for it within your DAW using negative 140 milliseconds. On the advanced page, we have controls that allow you to tweak the dynamics of the instrument. Let's hear the dynamics in its natural state first before we adjust anything. Let's try expanding those dynamics, which will exaggerate them. Compressed does the opposite in that the highest dynamic and the lowest dynamic will have the same perceived volume. This may be desirable if you want to do all of your volume editing manually. High and low register will compress either the high range of the instruments or the low range. Let's hear what that sounds like. The only patches with unique controls are the trills. If you load up the advanced page, you'll see a trill mode option. By default, they load up with velocity, which triggers minor and major trills based on how hard you play. Soft being minor, hard being major. But if you prefer to play it in instead, you can do it that way as well. Now the trills also have a unique offset time of 80 milliseconds. The majority of the library has 140 milliseconds, but both the trills and the marcatos have an 80 millisecond offset due to how they're designed. So like the other patches, you'll just have to compensate within your DAW, and it'll sound just fine and hit perfectly on the beat every time. We included an instrument symphonic folder, which is just a duplicate of all the instruments, but pre-designed to have both of the layers we described earlier. All right, guys, well, that covers the technical aspects of Nashville Scoring Strings. We designed the library to be as user-friendly as possible for both the beginner composer and the seasoned professional. I hope you enjoy the library, and I look forward to hearing from you. If you have any questions about the video or any aspects of the library maybe I forgot to cover, you can reach me at support@audioollie.com. Thanks.